Hi and welcome to this week's Mailbox, and it should come as no surprise that a lot of the questions are all based very much about what's coming up in the future, specifically for the Battle for Azeroth expansion, as well as classic WoW servers. So let's get into some of these statements. So the first one, someone's saying that about the tier thing. One of my friends was at BlizzCon and either asked or heard somebody else talking Ian about tier. Confuses me with the ion type spelling. The answer was that there would not be tier. Now, this is an interesting one. I've got a couple of things to say about this. First of all, what we really need is some clarification on that. It sort of makes sense, because the thing is, if you look at the armor that's going to be attached to the Heart of Azeroth, it's a head slot, a shoulder slot, and a chest slot. You can sort of clearly see that on the image that they showed there. That's 3 of the tier slots. So if they were going to continue with tier, they'd certainly have to make other slots tier, which is possible, of course. But, you know, yeah, sure, it could make sense to get rid of tier. My issue with this is twofold. Not getting rid of tier, I actually don't mind that. It's the fact that in a recent Q&A, the most recent Q&A, in fact, I know Ian Hazakostas was saying that, because when he was complaining about people using effectively a 6-set bonus, that is a 2-set bonus from one tier set and a 4-set from the other, that they didn't like that. They didn't like that sort of behaviour. They wanted people to transition from one to another. Yeah, they're sort of okay, obviously, as we've had for years, 2-set, and then before you move over to the 4-set. But the idea of having your cake and eating it, having your 4-set from your current tier, but still using 2-set from the last one, it's like, we don't like that. Well, why did you allow it, and why did you put Titan Fortune in to allow it as well? But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that what they said is they liked the concept of tier bonuses in general because it shakes up the gameplay, which it does. That's what tier set bonuses have always done. They've changed the gameplay at various points during the expansion. I am fairly ambivalent towards that aspect of the game, I have to say. But, you know, they like it. So then to say that they like it for that reason, and then to get rid of tier altogether, seems a little bit strange, because apart from anything else, these 3 bits of armour that are linked to the Heart of Azeroth and all the rest of it, we don't know full details of exactly how it works, other than it's sort of a similar thing to the, you know, if we call the artifact trait system a pseudo talent system for this expansion, this appears to the pseudo talent system for the next one, except less of the pseudo, because there is actual choice. It's not just a case of, you know, after a certain amount of time you collect it all. But yeah, it seems strange to get rid of tier after saying they like this aspect of it changing up the gameplay. Unless, of course, they expect some other feature to be introduced into the expansion that also shakes up the gameplay. I'm not sure that this armor is what that is, though. But the other thought I had instantly when I read this is how annoyed I am at so-called journalists at these events. You know, the large community personalities who get to sit down and interview these developers. And it was the same feelings I have when we do this live Q&A. I've always sort of said, the number of questions that people ask that are completely worthless just annoys the hell out of me. People will ask questions to which we already know the answer, or to which you can't get an answer. There are some things that we know in advance that Blizzard simply can't tell us. When people are asking about how Warfronts, for example, are going to pan out, what the detail of it is, Blizzard themselves said, you know, we're going to need testing on this. We need to wait until the beta's out there and people are able to test it. We don't even know how long it's going to take yet, how, you know, the sort of ways people are going to approach it. They're not going to know any of that until we actually are let loose in there and actually use it and have a go at it. So, and we know that. And, you know, we don't blame Blizzard for that. That's understandable. There are certain aspects of the game they're going to have to wait until it's tested on a much larger scale than the internal testing going on now before they can really say anything about it. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with asking those questions, but be aware you're not going to get an answer. So why not ask some questions? Now, one of the obvious questions I would have thought should always come up when you're asking about an expansion has just been announced. Number one question, absolute number one question is, are there any core features of the game disappearing or changing radically? Because I'll tell you something, if tier sets are disappearing, that's big news. And it's so big news that if it's true, how come it's not come out? other than this, I've not seen. And admittedly, there's lots of little interviews coming out. There's interviews that took place at BlizzCon for which the details didn't really emerge until after. There's interviews that's been taking place last week for which little snippets of details you can read up on Wowhead or MMO Champion. And there are some things of interest in there that I'm going to be talking about over the next week. But this, I haven't seen this. I certainly haven't seen people talking about it because I think that would be a talking point. So yeah, it annoys me. I wish people would go in with and actually think about their questions, you know, and don't ask the ones where you're not going to get an answer, or either because Blizzard are just clearly not going to answer you. I mean, those ones I would still ask, but you know, just get through them quickly. Or the ones to which you know they can't give an answer, and you know, and especially don't ask the questions to which we already know the answer. I mean, what's that about? It's like if you can't actually think of questions to ask, don't ask them. Let someone else interview them. Anyway, moaning over. Next one, it says, I'd argue non-racial impacts are outweighing what you're talking about. So this was the video I did on racials. Put up on Patreon first of all, it came out later on that week. And I was just basically looking at, because, you know, there is this perception, especially amongst raiders, but there seems to be a general perception, especially in EU. I had someone message me actually saying about, on North American realms, it appears that there's actually more Alliance than Horde, which is interesting. In Europe, it's different. It's more Horde than Alliance. But yeah, you certainly see more people in Horde, and definitely the perception is that Horde is better for raiding, at least for PvE. So I just basically came up with, you know, what is the DPS value of these things? I can't really attach a value to the utility aspects of some of these racials. You can discuss them, but you can't really attach a number to it. So this was all about putting numbers on it. And I was saying that, you know, Horde does come out on top, but only very slightly. So it says, I'd argue non-racial impacts are outweighing what you're talking about. Only really competitive people consider this sort of thing. And I have to disagree with that. It's not at all. Lots of people do. I think you can underestimate the effect that what the very competitive people do has on everyone else. People will copy it thinking it's best for them as well. And I know this from recruiting people. I spend a massive amount of time. I waste my time. I haven't been able to recruit anyone for ages. It's absolutely ridiculous. I am in a complete block at the moment. But when I do approach people, when I'm looking for people on like WoW Progress or something, I just look through Alliance players mostly. I spend some time looking at Horde players because I know that if I approach Horde people, and I always approach a few just in case, they're just going to tell me no, they're not going to change to Alliance. One, it's really expensive to transfer faction. But two, a lot of them, I sometimes talk to Alliance players who say specifically that they want to join a Horde guild, even though that's going to cost them more. They want to do that. And the reason they want to do that is because they perceive Horde as being better. Some of them want to do it because they just think, well, if it doesn't work out at that guild, there are more Horde guilds than Alliance guilds, so there's that side of it. Although I always think that's really defeatist. But yeah, the number of people that just think it's best to be Horde, even when they're not competitive, even when, you know, there may be at our level where we're, you know, going to be squeaky bum time getting the cutting edge, and some people maybe who even know they're not going to get the cutting edge will still think it's best to go Horde. You know, so that perception filters down. They'll just look at the top guilds. Even though you've got someone like Scrubbusters, Alliance Guild, they're really competitive. They're right up there. But people just look at the very top, and they'll look at the top 10. They'll say, well, it's mostly Horde. There must be a reason it's mostly Horde. Well, in the top 10, maybe there is a reason it's mostly Horde. But it doesn't, you know, those sort of things don't affect lower down. So I do think that a lot of people do have those perceptions. A lot of the perceptions that people have are not valid, but they have them anyway. And they feed into each other because you basically create a huge echo chamber that is reinforced by the fact, well, you look at the very best, and most of those are Horde. So I think that's what it is. And that's why I was sort of asked another sort of question yesterday, really, about racials in general, strong racials. My attitude is racial. I understand, and I totally agree with, by the way, the fact that you can't just allow any race to play any class in World of Warcraft. There's some other games for which you can. You know, I always plug Elder Scrolls Online. That's one for which you can. You can play whatever race you want, and whatever class. That's a different thing. But for World of Warcraft, there are some class race combinations that just don't make sense. I'm very pleased to report that Ian Hazakostas himself said that Gnome Paladins is one such combination. It's not going to happen. Doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't. But beyond that, your choice of race should be cosmetic. It should be which one you like most. and it's not. And there's various restrictions in place. First of all, there's the faction restriction in place. Now, I always say that factions are obviously really important for PvP. They are a detriment to PvE. Now, I'm not arguing that there should be no such thing as factions in PvE for World of Warcraft, because it's just the way it is. The nature of World of Warcraft sort of means that I can't argue for the fact that, you know, maybe you should have orcs that choose to join the Alliance, and maybe you should have gnomes that choose to join the Horde. You're welcome to them, by the way. You know, in most MMO worlds, that is fine. In World of Warcraft's a very racist game, really. Everyone sort of behaves along racial lines, really, or the vast majority of even so-called hero NPCs behave very much along their racial lines. So neutral is about the best you can ever get. People joining like the Earthen Ring or the Argent Dawn, things like that, and getting Horde races with Alliance races working together in that sort of neutral faction. That's as near as you get. You never get one crossing from one over to the other, except Pandaren, who are in both camps. So, yeah, in terms of racials, I think that when anyone makes a decision on the race based on gameplay, I think that's wrong. And I don't like it when Blizzard are really glib and say you should play whatever race you want, and then clearly don't give you the tools to do that. If you play whatever race you want, you should allow them to do that. And they can't. Like, some people are going, well, this racial is too strong, and even 1% extra is worth something, and some racials are worth a bit more than 1%. So you can understand competitive players saying no. And again, it filters all the way down. And I can try and say to people with a racial that the things they'll do in a fight are going to be more of a DPS loss than you get gain from the racial, because, for example, you know, if you make some rotational mistakes, you're going to lose some DPS. If you're a bit slow to react to something, you're going to lose some DPS, or effective DPS at least, or something like that. Or if you don't plan for a load of ads coming in, you're going to lose some DPS. And all of those things will be more than the benefit you're getting from the race. But people will just say, but still, I'm getting a benefit from that racial, aren't I? And the answer is yes, to which they go, okay. So that's the way it is with some people. So yeah, I just think it should be within the realms of sensible class race combinations. I think it should just be cosmetic. And I think the racials, if they have them at all, should just be cosmetic ones. It's my opinion. Next one, it says, which faction is more justified in their cause? This is a dodgy one to answer. It says, which one of them is morally better? Now, I'm going to get a lot of hate on this one. Obviously, I much prefer the Alliance. I was to play the Alliance. I don't know why exactly, though. I know why I started playing the Alliance in World of Warcraft, and that is a couple of things. When I started playing World of Warcraft, it was a friend that got me into it, and he was Alliance anyway. But the important thing is, the reason why I bought the game is because I asked this, because I was a bit about it. I wasn't sure about MMOs that they'd be my thing. I loved the Warcraft games. I played all the other Warcraft games, and I was still playing Warcraft 3 on a regular basis. But the idea of World of Warcraft's like, and I asked, can you play a Paladin? He said yes, so I got it. Now, of course, Paladin couldn't be Horde in vanilla, so you were definitely going to be playing that. Now, if my friend had happened to be, because he played a hunter, if he'd happened to be a Horde hunter, I'm not sure I'd have got into it, because he'd have probably said something like, yes, but then you wouldn't be able to play with me because I'm Horde. He was playing Alliance, and on the realm he was because of friends of his that were playing it. So it all sort of worked out. There's very much a lot of serendipity going on there that got me in the first place. So I know why I played Alliance to begin with. But even now, I much prefer to be Alliance. And it took a lot for me to faction change to Horde last expansion, and then I changed back. And so I'm definitely biased. But I can't really pin down what it is about Alliance that I most like. I prefer the cities and the buildings and all that sort of stuff. I think it's very drab on the Horde side. But there's, you know, in terms of some races on the Horde side, I'm quite happy playing those. So I don't know what it is. But here's the thing. I do have a view about who is morally better. And if I'm honest, although there are individuals on both sides of that Alliance and the Horde, I'll just get this in now, that have questionable morals at best, and some are just downright evil, and there are ones on both sides who are very honourable, nonetheless, the facts as they present themselves suggest that the Horde carried out unprovoked attacks on the Alliance in Warcraft 1 and 2, I can't think of a situation where the Alliance has instigated war against the Horde except to recapture territory that was previously theirs. And so I'll leave it at that. Next one says it's going to be interesting and sadly hilarious to see an expansion based around PvP when PvP is very unfun and imbalanced. Obviously, the unfun side of it is very much subjective. I agree that PvP in World of Warcraft is not very fun at all. I think it is fun in other games and other MMOs and not in this one. Imbalance, I think balance is probably an issue for PvP en masse. There are always issues. It's very stark when I was playing when I played Warhammer Online, because I did that when I was taking a break from World of Warcraft. I call it a break. It was a break in hindsight. At the time, I was giving up World of Warcraft, and I got into it. Really did get into it. So I played it, in the guild and all the rest of it. And I was doing daily PvP stuff, spending several hours in the same sort of time I would spend raiding before. And yeah, you got because there's different types of PvP. You've got one-on-one. In a one-on-one situation, it was clearly imbalanced. There was very much a paper, rock, scissors about it. There were some classes that were just really good at beating those classes, and those classes might be better at those ones, and so on. So 1v1 things were rarely fair. But then that a PvP game isn't about 1v1, so it doesn't matter if there's imbalance on that level. Then you've got your I can't even remember what they were called, but we'd call them battlegrounds, where you've got limited numbers each side. You've got various objectives, but ultimately it's a fill the bar up and get to so many points and you win. In those sort of situations, again, some classes will excel more than others. Then you've got your straight up sieges. You're besieging a fort. In a situation like that, do you really want to be melee? Not really. You're going to get battered. So you want to be ranged or healer or something like that. So there are always situations where balance is very, very difficult in PvP. It's very difficult. I think it's very difficult. You can have people doing what would be considered from any other situation a really good job of balancing, and it's still unbalanced because, again, how do you balance classes to be equally good in 1v1, like 5v5 maybe, 20v20, or unlimited big gangbang in the middle around a fort? And I think it is really difficult. But in terms of this, seeing an expansion based around PvP, I have seen one of these recent interviews where, because it's interesting, I was just watching one of the videos of half watched it. I haven't watched it all yet. Teldrassil doing one on why it won't really be a PvP expansion. But they are determined. They are determined to make it a PvP expansion. Now, of course, one thing I was talking about last week with BlizzCon really is this idea that the raids, the raids are always the big story drivers in an expansion, and the raids obviously can't be different for Horde and Alliance. They did hint at the possibility of some raid bosses being faction bosses, which would be different for Horde and Alliance, but they'd presumably still have to have the same mechanics, just a different model for the enemy, the boss. And you can't do that all the way through anyway. So there are still common enemies, which means there must be storylines where effectively Horde and Alliance are working together, as they always have. But Blizzard are very, very determined, it seems, to really go to town on the PvP aspect of it. And Ian Hazacostas has just said recently, this week in fact, that they haven't done a good job of PvP in World of Warcraft, and that they are wanting to address that. Now, acknowledging that they haven't done a good job of it and they're wanting to address it doesn't mean that they are suddenly going to do a really good job of it. For example, what I think is essential to make PvP really good in an MMO, they're not going to do. So I straight away think it's doomed to failure. That being said, I remain to be surprised. They may well come to... I just hope it's more than just the... Obviously, there's some things they're thinking of putting in, like the bounty system. They've not said this is definitely in, by the way, but it's a possibility. This idea that, you can choose whether you flag yourself as PvE or PvP, which is going to be really important, by the way, because if they make a real push for so-called world PvP in a much more structured way, I don't want to be any part of that. I'm not interested in it. So I don't want my quest. It's bad enough when people come in and kill the NPCs. But I don't want my general questing habits disrupted by people. It's annoying. Even though the vast majority of time it ends up in their deaths, it's still annoying. So I can be doing without it. But this idea that if you choose to be like effectively PvP flagged, that as a PvP player, and you kill people, the more people you kill, the more of a name you make for yourself within the game, and bounties will emerge, encouraging other people to kill you with the rewards for killing you. So you become like a wanted fugitive, effectively. Not a fugitive in the sense that guards will arrest you in the city, but the other players will be basically told about you by the game, and people will seek out and destroy you. And some people like that idea, and that's the sort of thing that might encourage that. Equally, it may not. I don't know how that's going to work with sharding and things like that. Is that going to work? But it was just something they threw out there. But what seems to be clear is that they are putting some serious effort into not just making the storylines Horde vs Alliance, which I don't think they can easily, but making the world faction v faction, I think, is the aim. In other words, I think it goes beyond simply these island scenarios and the war fronts where you're fighting against AI enemy faction NPCs. I think it goes beyond that. Next one, it says, what if the Alliance lose Darnassus and gain Lordaeron while the Horde lose Undercity and gain Kazan? A couple of things there. First of all, it sounds like that seems to be what's happening. A little bit surprising. It does seem that way. Obviously, the burning of Teldrassil is a thing, and that's going to make Darnassus basically uninhabitable. So we are, it sounds like, losing Darnassus. I don't know what happens to new Night Elf players. Obviously, it can be the situation where it doesn't have an effect until you get to a certain level 110, whatever. And then we're immediately attacking Lordaeron, again, suggesting... I don't think it's so much the fact that the Alliance are going to gain Undercity, so much as the Horde may lose it, which would be a terrible shame. I like Undercity. It's my favourite Horde city. But it does sound like that's what's going to happen. But in terms of gaining Kazan, no, they've actually said that there's no plans for Kazan other than it being a dungeon. It's a dungeon, because it's in that general geographical location. They said they have no plans for further developing it. Now, no plans doesn't mean to say they won't be doing, but what it does mean is it's not going to be developed in the first part of the next expansion, if it indeed is for the rest of that expansion. And it might do in some point later in the future. But it's certainly not going to be there. So, which is also getting me to think that we're, as the Alliance, say we, as the Alliance, are not actually going to gain Lordaeron. I think we're just going to kick the Horde out, is what it sounds like to me. It all sounds very strange, though. I'd like to hear much more detail about this. But we may not find out a lot out until beta opens out. And they've said that beta is going to be coming out early next year. Of course, early next year could mean straight away in the new year. It could mean as late as March, couldn't it? That would still be early 2018. I kind of think it would be a bit earlier, though. I think it would be probably January, if I were to have to guess. But it would just be a guess. It would just be a guess. Next one on to Classic WoW then. So, new vanilla won't be the same. It says a part of the charm was that the user base didn't use Wowhead, stroke Thoughtbot, Alakazam, but they did use them, like we are today. Of course, some people did, but today's internet knowledge is far bigger, even more so with YouTube. Cookie cutter specs will be far more prevalent. Now, I've got some things I definitely agree with that. In general terms, yes, the population was less clued up on stuff. I would still argue that the majority of the population is still not clued up even today. Blizzard conservatively estimate that maybe something, I think when they were saying about it, maybe about 20% of the player base actually look things up anyway. It may not even be as much as that, although I kind of think it probably is at least that. But I mean, certainly things did exist. I agree that more exists now and quicker. That's the important thing, quicker. But I looked something from Thoughtbot at one time. The how to get the Thunderbrew boot flask, I certainly looked that up. There was no way I was going scouring the world looking for all those bits. For those who don't know, this was a... You got it. It was sort of... It was a quest, but wasn't a quest, sort of. You didn't, like, pick up a quest and then go around trying to find the bits. There was one of the Thunderbrew dwarfs in Westfall, over in the hills and south, and you basically went around gathering ingredients for that, and you got a bit. It was a trinket that let you breathe fire, but there were no clues really as to where they were. There were sort of clues, but they didn't tell you where these things were. So I looked it up. So information did exist, and if you wanted to look it up, you could look it up there. But I certainly agree that there will be much more information in there, particularly on the theory crafting side of it. Some of which did exist then, but it wasn't very widespread. But in terms of cookie cutter specs being far more prevalent, I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think they were very prevalent at the time. In fact, so much so that some people were basically bullied into not varying them. I had a friend, for example, who could play Beastmaster Hunter very, very well, do loads of damage, but everyone just had this attitude that for raiding you had to be marksman. Actually, people preferred you to be marksman in dungeons as well, but that was because of... Hunters got a very bad rep because of poor pet control. You know, the sort of thing where you would jump off something and as a little bit of a shortcut in a dungeon. There was a particular point in Blackrock Spire, I remember, that it was quite common. And most people, if they had a pet, if they were a hunter with a pet, the pet wouldn't jump off. The pet would just go around and pull everything in the way, and you'd suddenly have loads of things. So you'd get people who'd go mad if you had a pet as a hunter. Put the pet away, put the pet away. Which, of course, you had to do when you were jumping off a ledge, but you could then get it back out again. But people were very nervous about you having a pet out at all, especially in a dungeon. Whereas... and in raiding, people just had the attitude that you just couldn't do very good damage with it. But again, that was because people had experienced those who just were not very good at it. But when you had someone who was good at it, do you know what? They could do very good damage. And so it might well be that there is more variation than there was at the time. Because, yeah, I think cookie cutter specs were pushed down people's throats as if this is the spec that is best for your class. And that's all there is to it. There is no, two ways about it, which was not true. I mean, there were quite a lot of talents that were useless, sure, but generally speaking, there was variation possible there, I think, and I think people would be, I think they'll be less inclined. I mean, time will tell, but I think they'll be less inclined to use those. But it won't be the same experience. I certainly agree that it can't possibly be the same experience because we know so much. We just know so much now. Next one. So this is about the Heart of Azeroth progression path again. So again, this is what it looks like. I fully expect the nodes in the center of the Heart of Azeroth progression path is a legendary-like effect. So this is talking about, legendaries basically reportedly disappearing in the next expansion. The issue Blizzard had with legendaries in this expansion was the number of slots that became locked by the various items which were not really optional. I'm not sure that's the issue Blizzard had, because Blizzard created that situation. I think that's the issue we had. The issue Blizzard had was that we moaned a lot about legendaries and consider them a blight upon Legion. What is a very good expansion has been... There's a few really big negatives about the expansion, and legendaries is probably top of that list. I think that's the issue Blizzard had, that we were not very appreciative of the system. It says consolidating tier and legendary to the same slot is possible with the new system, allowing all of the slots to be completely optional. This allows Blizzard to phase legendary bonus out as tiers progress, assuming, of course, there are such things as tiers. Going back to that first statement there. I mean, I think again this is reported. I haven't seen this in print anywhere. So this is just what some guy said that a guy said, basically, at BlizzCon, that Blizzard were concerned, or at least keen to stress, that this system of the 3 armor pieces linked to the Heart of Azeroth were not seen as legendaries by another name. Because, I mean, you could argue it. I mean, put it this way. They've already said those armor pieces won't Titan Forge. Now, does that mean that those items will be set at the upper limit of what things can Titan Forge to? In which case, you could argue that all they have to do is change the name of those items to an orange font, and they effectively are legendaries, and it is a legendary system by another name. or not, I don't know. So again, we don't know really details of how a lot of these things are going to work. It may well be that in some regards Blizzard don't know the details, but we'll just have to wait and see on that one. But it could well be, given that these items have a fixed item level, if it's aimed to be so that it doesn't drag everything down, the upper end of what things can Titan Forge to, then I would probably take them to be just a different type of legendary system, but at least a better one, potentially. I'm not saying they should just change it to orange and call them legendaries if that's what they end up being in practice. But, you know, it could be. This could be a new one. But at the same time, I would still be happy to hear that they're not even going to attempt proper legendaries, if indeed they're not. I mean, one thing that occurred to me, actually, is because I keep saying this, it's probably like Blizzard have tried all these different systems for legendaries, and none of them are really suitable for the modern game. Maybe what they're doing with the Eye of Amonthul is their last roll of the die. Maybe this is it. Because with the Eye of Amonthul, it's the last legendary we're sort of going to be expecting to get. Drops off the last boss, but it's reputed to be low drop rate, like really low drop rate, and personal loot, so you can't just assign it, which I'm pleased about. I wouldn't like to try and decide who to assign that to, given that I'd want it myself. So it's much better that way. But also, it does mean it's much more like an old-fashioned legendary that just can't be assigned, because not many people are going to get it. Whereas the current legendaries, we know everyone can get it if they play enough. Whereas this one, it's like there's two new legendaries, basically, when Torus comes out. There's the one you're just going to get by killing Argus as a quest. You just get it. And the other one is one that most people are just not going to get, ever. Depending on what that drop rate is. And maybe it's one of those things where if people don't complain a lot about it, maybe they'll see that as something that they might do in the next expansion. Maybe on a later boss, later on in the expansion, they do a similar sort of thing, because that would be less of a headache, assuming people don't basically outrage at the concept of a small number of people getting this thing. I mean, I wouldn't be very happy with it, but we'll have to see how the play base at large is. Next one, it says, will there be any patches after Antorus comes out? Inevitably. When Antorus comes out, we haven't even started the beta for, like, the open alpha stroke beta for the next expansion. The next expansion, you would think, is going to be the release of it a good 9 months roundabout, seems to be, after they open up testing and remove the NDAs. That seems to be roughly the period of time. So there has to be other patches. They've already said there's no more major raids. They haven't said there's no more raids, full stop. But also, it's not just about raids. There's other bits of content as well. We're not just going to drag our heels until the pre-expansion patch comes out. The pre-expansion patch, remember, only comes out about a month before the release of the expansion, generally speaking. So yeah, they're not, because that would be a content drought. People are not going to be happy about, the whole point of Legion is no more content drought. And this time we mean it. And that's the whole point of Legion. Legion fails if they don't deliver on that. So there has to be content. Obviously, it needs to wind down a little bit towards the end, because they don't want to bring in content that means a lot of people miss out on it because there's not enough time to do it, because they brought it out too close to the next expansion. So there has to be a little bit of a winding down. But there nonetheless has to be content, which means there has to be patches. There has to be like a patch 7.4, really. So I would say inevitably on that one. Next one says, BFA will be very old god focused. Queen Ashara raid was confirmed as the first raid tier, blah, blah, blah. Queen Ashara has certainly been confirmed as being in there. And, of course, would link with old gods. And I still think old gods are going to form the basis of a tier in there. But to say that the expansion will be very old gods focused, I think we can quite, if not clearly, strongly suspect that that's not going to be the case. There was not a hint of old gods involvement. Not a hint of it in the, in anything that was discussed at BlizzCon. Not a sniff. Now, I think there is going to be old gods involvement, but given that it didn't feature at all in anything they talked about at BlizzCon, I think it's going to be a side story at best. A bit like the Emerald Nightmare was for Legion. In fact, that's it. I think it's going to be no bigger than the Old Gods involvement was for Legion. is the way it seems to be shaping up, which was a surprise to me because I thought it would be very Old Gods related. But in actual fact, I think Old Gods are going to be there. Maybe they're going to be there in the pre-expansion patch. Maybe that's the thing. I still, think that there's going to be some Old Gods link to what's going on in Silithus, although I can't be certain. But it just, it appeals to me. I think there's going to be some Old Gods influence on our artifact weapons. I think that's going to be a thing. And I think there's going to be a tier in the expansion that is Old Gods related. But in terms of an overarching story across the expansion, they're really keen on making that Horde versus Alliance. They're really keen on that. That's what they're stressing. So at the moment, that's sort of what I think what we're going to have to assume. Until we find out further details, of course. Right, last one, at the risk of bringing this one up again. It says, I don't know why all can't get behind the Anduin wearing plate. He is the king, and a king usually wears armor which shows his status. Well, let's have a think about the other faction leaders, the other racial leaders then. So, basically, the Alliance has 3 priest leaders. We've got Velen, who's the leader of the Draenei. He doesn't wear plate. He has followers who wear plates. There's knights of Draenei. He doesn't. He doesn't feel the need to. He's a priesty priest. Tyrande, same thing. She doesn't. And I don't buy the thing, yes, but Anduin's the king. He's the king of all of them. He's really not. In theory, he is the faction leader for the Alliance. In practice, Tyrande, Velen, Gen, that idiot gnome, Moira Bronzebeard, or any of the other dwarfs, actually, don't have to do what Anduin says. They form a council. He can say that, we should do this. They don't have to agree with him. They don't, he doesn't command them. He commands Stormwind. So, although in theory he's a little bit higher up than the likes of Tyrande, Velen and all the rest of it, simply because the Alliance accepts that the King of Stormwind is the King of the Alliance, if he says, right, we're going to do this thing, and they turn around as Tyrande did and says, well, we're not going to, then that's the way it is. And as I say, Tyrande's a priest, she doesn't wear plate, and Velen is a priest and he doesn't wear plate. So I don't really buy that one. I'm accepting that he's a priest. Blizzard have said he's a priest, simple as that. But at the same time, you could have knocked me down with a feather when they said so. So there we go. That's all there is to it. So thanks very much for watching the mailbox. I hope you enjoyed it. Every week, again, I will pick up questions like this as well that people have been asking on YouTube, as well as occasionally some pop out from Patreon, Twitter and stuff like that as well. Thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe especially, and share with other people. And until next time, I'll see you later.